Hey guys, I hope you had a great weekend. Make sure you read the housekeeping notes that I left you at the top of our link today. I think you'll find those helpful in planning out the rest of your week. So today we're talking about inequalities, and inequalities should be pretty familiar. Like for instance, you've seen simple inequalities. Simple inequalities look like this. Any number greater than 2, x greater than 2. And with these inequalities, there are many different ways that you can represent them. For instance, one of them, or the first way, is actually right in front of you on the screen here. We call this inequality notation because it's written as an actual inequality. But you might remember from last year that you can actually put this on a number line as well. So here's what this inequality would look like on a number line. You'll notice that there is an open circle on 2. That's because that's not inclusive. We do not want to include 2. And then it's shaded to the right because those are all of the numbers that are greater than 2. So open circle on 2, shade to the right. And this would be what it looks like if it were graphed onto a number line. The third way that we can represent inequalities is by using what's called interval notation. Interval notation is a way to represent an inequality using brackets or parentheses. For instance, here, this is how we would represent all of the numbers greater than 2. We know that the numbers have to start at 2 and go all the way to infinity. But we're using parentheses here because parentheses are not inclusive. Or in other words, parentheses are what you would use for open circles. We're going to start at 2, parenthesis, because it doesn't include it. And we know that x has to go from 2 all the way up to infinity because it's greater than 2. And so we're going to put a parenthesis on infinity as well because, well, you can't have anything equal to infinity. So it would be parentheses on both sides. Now, we're going to start to learn some new inequalities, and the first one is called a compound and inequality. A compound and inequality is when you're thinking of a number or when you have a variable in between one number and another number, like this. You'll notice here that we have a number, x, and it is greater than -3 and also less than or equal to 2. This is called an and inequality because the number is in between one number and another number. And it's usually written just like this on top, kind of like a train where the arrows have to be pointed in the same direction. Sometimes students call these sandwich inequalities because they realize that the number that you're looking for, the mystery number, has to be sandwiched in between one number and another number. And sometimes you might see an and inequality written like this here on the bottom, with this awkward giant capital but lowercase n in the middle. This is called a intersection symbol, intersection, and it implies and. Some kids actually say that it kind of looks like an A without the cross through the middle. But it means the exact same thing as the one above it. We're looking for a number that is greater than -3, and also that number has to be less than or equal to 2. You can put this on a number line, and I'm sure you kind of know what to expect here, but this is what it would look like on a number line. You'll notice that it is open circle on -3 because it's not inclusive, and it's shaded all the way till 2, but it has to be shaded in because that is inclusive. So we know then that the variable, or x, has to be in between -3 not inclusive and 2 inclusive. You can also write this as an interval notation. It would look like this. You'll notice here that we know that it's between -3 and 2. -3 is not inclusive, so it gets a parenthesis. 2 is inclusive, so it gets a bracket. And then the third type of inequality that we have is a compound or inequality. A compound or inequality is when x could be one thing or another thing. For instance, you might have an inequality where x has to be less than or equal to -3, or, that's the giant U there, that's the symbol for or, x could be greater than 2. Now we call these or statements because when you graph them, they face in opposite directions. So you'll notice over here on the left, x could be less than or equal to -3. inclusive closed, or x could be greater than 2, open circle, not inclusive. So you'll notice that the main difference is that and inequalities converge and or inequalities diverge. When you have an or inequality written in interval notation, it has to be separated. There is no way to write interval notation as one interval. It has to be 2, because we know that the number could be between negative infinity up to negative 3, inclusive on negative 3, or we know that x could be greater than 2, which means it could be from 2 not inclusive to infinity. So these are the 3 different types of inequalities we're going to be working on this week: simple inequalities, compound and compound or. You can put them on number lines, and you can also write them using interval notation, which is using brackets for inclusive and parentheses for not inclusive.